Today I'm going to start this video with a question. If I asked you to think of a white robot and a black robot, what exactly do you have in your mind? What picture does that create? Well, for most of you, I would imagine it's probably something similar to a standard internet image search for those terms. Probably thinking of this bright pure white plastic finish, or these high-gloss black piano finishes. Or you may be thinking of something like a robot vacuum cleaner and the variety of finishes that they come in. So now what I want you to do is to put a pin in that, and we'll come back to it shortly because it's quite important. Over the past weeks and indeed months, you may have seen articles such as this one cropping up every so often. Robot racism? Yes, says a study showing humans' biases extend to robots. And reading from this particular article, Robots and Racism, a study conducted by the Human Interface Technology Laboratory in New Zealand and published by the country's University of Canterbury, suggests people perceive physically human-like robots to have a race and therefore apply racial stereotypes to white and black robots. These colours have been found to trigger social cues that determine how humans react to and behave toward other people, and also apparently robots. The bias against black robots is a result of bias against African Americans, lead researcher Christopher Bartneck explained to The Next Web. He told CNN, "It is amazing to see how people who had no prior interaction with robots show racial bias towards them." Well, that all sounds very damning, doesn't it? Apparently, when you plop one of these shiny piano black robots in front of people, they're just going to not like it. They're going to look at that robot and think, oh, I bet that robot spends its weekends stealing cars or something. Probably doesn't even have a job and just spends all of its time getting high with its friends. Of course, that is not the case at all. So today, let's delve into the absolute pseudoscience that is robots and racism. The abstract reads, most robots currently being sold or developed are either stylized with white material or have a metallic appearance. In this research, we used the shooter bias paradigm and several questionnaires to investigate if people automatically identify robots as being racialized, such that we might say some robots are white while others are Asian or black. To do so, we conducted an extended replication of the classic social psychological shooter bias paradigm using robot stimuli to explore whether effects known for human-human intergroup experiments would generalize to robots that were racialized as black and white. Reaction time-based measures revealed that participants demonstrated shooter bias towards both black people and robots racialized as black. Participants were also willing to attribute a race to the robots depending on their racialization and demonstrate a high degree of inter-subject agreement when it came to these attributions. So, for anyone who is a long-time viewer of this channel, alarm bells should be going off immediately. The shooter bias test is part of the implicit association test. The implicit association test measures how long it takes a person to react to a stimulus and will then assign to them whether or not they have a prejudice or no prejudice based on how long it takes for them to react. The problem with this, of course, is that between stimuli you're often looking at tenths or even hundredths of a second difference. In other words, if it takes you a tenth of a second longer to shoot a white person than a black person in this scenario, you will be deemed as being racist towards black people because you shot them a blink of an eye faster. And in some cases, the differences will not even be 1/10 of a second. Putting that into terms of blinking, your eye would not even be closed. And yet, that difference is enough to declare whether or not someone is a racist. Of course, this is complete and utter pseudoscience. There are a variety of factors that go into these tests, and the idea that you are only measuring racism or bias or prejudice or bigotry by using them is absurd. As I've covered in a previous video on the topic, when using, say, the black-white preference test, that is, clicking either left or right for a positive or negative word or a black or white face, you learn a pattern, say clicking left for good and clicking left for a white face, therefore clicking right for a black face or right for a bad word. Then, halfway through the test, that rule set will flip. You will then be clicking left for a negative word or black faces and clicking right for positive words or white faces. Of course, the fact that the rule set has changed halfway through the game, that can be a biasing factor in itself. Anyone who has played, for instance, a video game where something causes your controls to change from what they are, will know what a massive impact that is on your performance.
Oh no, oh, Cupid shooting at me.
I never finished my thought, did I?
No.
It makes you all walk weird, I think. Like you don't walk.
Okay, I'm in love.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm pushing right on the thumbstick right now, and I'm going straight up. So left, down is right, left is down, left, down. Oh no, there's a hamster.
You spend a certain amount of time learning a particular pattern to then immediately have to learn another pattern. Well, the test may simply be detecting the learning curve for that change, but then it's going to declare that you are a racist because you had a learning curve. The long and short of it is, shooter bias tests, implicit bias tests, these things are absolute pseudoscience that do not prove anything anyway at all. They simply measure something, and that something isn't actually something that we can solidly pin down as necessarily being a bias or something else. As said, it may be measuring a learning curve for a new pattern of behavior, and in other test iterations, which again I covered in that video, you can influence people's answers by just telling them you are in Group A, not Group B, and then later on saying you're in Group B, not Group A. And people's reaction times and answers will vary based on that information. Ultimately, this is the first sign that this study is not something that you should be trusting. The second one, and oh boy, this is my favourite part. So remember back to the beginning of the video where I asked you to think of a black robot or a white robot, and how I can pretty much guarantee that most of you out there thought of these high-gloss, actually white and actually black things. Turns out, we're all wrong. In the section of the paper where they talk about how they racialized the robots, well, let's see what they did. To give the Now, which is the robot, a racialized appearance as black and as white, we calibrated its color based on sampling the skin tones in a professional photograph of a black woman and a white woman, see figure 2. We manipulated the robot in this way to match the stimuli, wherein the melanation was the most salient identifier of the black versus white human exemplars. They then go on to ask the group of people whether or not they view these robots as having a race analogous to that of humans. They asked 53 people whether or not these robots had a race. There was an option to say does not apply. Only 11.3% of the participants and 7.5% of participants selected does not apply for the black and white racialized robots respectively. By comparison, 52.8% of participants indicated that the robot racialized as black was indeed perceived as black, while 67.9% indicated that the robot racialized as white was indeed perceived as white. These results suggest that robots may be ascribed a race even when no questions about race are included prior to making such judgments. My God, the levels of absolute pseudoscience that we have reached here is unfathomable. You take a humanoid robot, you color it to be the same color as a person, and then you ask people, hey, is that thing the same color as a person? And what a surprise, a lot of the people said, yes, it is the same color as a person. And then the researchers and all of the people reporting on this say, boom, that's it, racism confirmed. Racism aimed at robots, no less. because people were able to identify when asked if the colour of these robots was similar to the colour of people. This is race-based science in 2018, ladies and gentlemen. Between these 2 points, first of all the fact that it is an implicit association bias test, and the fact that they coloured the robots using human skin tones as opposed to actual black and white robots as they are available on the market today. Between these 2 points, I am quite happy to declare that this study is absolute pseudoscience and should not be taken seriously by anyone under any circumstances, and anyone who looks at this and thinks that it proves anything is frankly scientifically illiterate and pushing a narrative. And one thing which amazes me even more is when these robots were expressly coloured using the same skin colour as humans, still only between 50 and 70% of people said, yeah, it looks like it's coloured the same as humans. That fact alone is astounding to me, that in a best case scenario you can colour a humanoid robot as a black person or a white person, and in a best case scenario it'll be a coin flip as to whether or not people actually identify that robot with the skin colour that you have intentionally coloured it with. While we're talking about the pseudoscience of this paper, I want to come back to the time difference between shooting black or white in this scenario. So remember, for you to blink is about 1/10 of a second. That's 0.1 seconds or 100 milliseconds. So just looking at the first result there from study 1, it took 598 milliseconds to shoot the black, but 604 milliseconds to shoot the white. That is a difference of 6 milliseconds, also known as 0.006 of a second. Apparently that is how long it takes to determine whether or not someone is a racist.